Next up, a beneficiary check. So this is relevant to insurance, but it's also relevant to investments. And I'll tell you how this can go left if not managed appropriately. There are certain investment accounts, like non-retirement investment accounts, that for one, they're not even required to have a beneficiary. And we have talked about estate planning and probate and trying whenever possible to have a listed beneficiary on the account, because if you have a listed beneficiary on the account, it avoids probate, which not only saves your beneficiaries time if something happens to you in terms of when they can access it, it can also lower costs because if it's out of your probate estate, it's not included in the calculation of the fees that your family would pay to settle your estate. So whenever possible, you want to establish a beneficiary, but some investment accounts just don't have them, but you can add them. So if you have a non-qualified, which is just another word for a non-retirement account, and there's not a listed beneficiary, you can ask about adding one and start that process. For insurance policies and investment accounts that do have listed beneficiaries, you want to make sure that you have both a primary that's listed, which in most cases is going to be you or your spouse, depending on the ownership of that account, but also a secondary beneficiary listed that is not a minor. So when you have a minor and you don't have an estate plan and you leave money to that child, you're leaving it up to the state to determine how that money is dispersed for the benefit of the child. So when we have people who have life insurance policies and maybe they do have their spouse listed as the primary beneficiary, if they have a will and they have maybe a revocable trust, we make sure that that is added as the contingent beneficiary, or you can name your child as the contingent beneficiary directly because you do have an estate planning document that dictates how money left to them should be managed and dispersed. Now, where this can go left, aside from just not having a beneficiary listed in the first place, is if you have children from a previous relationship, your spouse has children from a previous relationship, or you have been previously married. Because it is also not uncommon for us to look through the beneficiaries of accounts, especially ones that were created before the current relationship, and see the ex-spouse listed. And this is true of both non-retirement accounts and old 401ks at previous employers that you might have forgotten about. Or there'll be a scenario where you've done what's called disinheriting your children. So, for example, let's say that your spouse has children from a previous relationship or a former spouse. You find a 401k from a previous employer. It's been floating around out there for years, and with no ill intent, your spouse has left either their ex-spouse or their children from their previous relationship as beneficiaries on that account. And I can tell you, there is no legal obligation for a former spouse to decline that inheritance and give it to the current spouse. If they get that money, it's theirs to do with it. They can burn it if they want to, even if you know your partner would have intended for it to come to you. Now, if your spouse has children from a previous relationship, I doubt that there's a scenario where they wouldn't want to take care of them upon their death. But if you have children together as well, you want to make sure that those are splitted equally, if that's your desire, or that the children you have together are at least addressed in some way in that plan. And this can work in reverse as well. We've seen scenarios where maybe you are the person who goes through a divorce and your former spouse has obligations to the children that you had together. They remarry and take you off of everything and put their new spouse on that policy or that investment account. And that's something that you want to make sure is addressed if you do go through a divorce in your domestic relations order. You want to make sure that there's a very clear understanding of what's due to you. And there can be, in some scenarios, regular updates where you have to prove that a certain amount of life insurance is still in force on your former spouse until your children reach of age, that you are entitled to your share of any assets that maybe your former spouse accumulated with most of their earnings, but they did it while you were married, and as a result, you have a claim to some of those assets. These are all the reasons, and some that we're probably missing, for why checking the beneficiaries is a needed part of this conversation.